Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Ian. Welcome back to the channel, Ian the Reader. Today I have a ranking video for you. In this video, I'm going to be ranking the 4 thriller books written by Lucy Foley. Now this author is actually quite interesting because originally when she started her writing career, she was publishing historical fiction, kind of like historical romance almost type fiction books. And now she is like fully transitioned into mystery thriller author fame. Really as a result of her novel The Hunting Party, but the one that really skyrocketed her into fame was The Guest List. And that's actually the only book that I had read by her up to a point very recently when I did get an arc of her newest release, The Midnight Feast, that is out this week. And when I got that arc, I decided to go ahead and read her other 2 thrillers as well so I could do a ranking and review video for you all. I've done a handful of videos in this series. So far, I've done Alex Michaelides, who wrote The Silent Patient, The Fury, and The Maidens, and then I also did a ranking of all of Riley Sager's works, which he actually has a new book coming out this week as well, and I did read that book for that video, so I'll go ahead and leave a link to both of those videos down below. And this is the next mystery thriller author that I've chosen, but I love doing these types of videos. I love really digging into an author's bibliography, reading all that they've really written, especially in a specific genre, and getting to review and rank them for you guys. So let me know in the comments which author I should read next. I've got a few already kind of lined up that I've already read all of their books for, but I'm really excited about tackling my next author very soon. Let's jump into this video. I will be doing short reviews for all 4 of her mystery thriller novels, those being The Hunting Party, The Guest List, The Paris Apartment, and her newest release, The Midnight Feast. And as I'm going, I will be revealing my ranking from least favorite to favorite, ultimately capping off with my absolute favorite of the 4 books. Without any further ado, let's jump in. So coming in 4th place is The Hunting Party. So this is her first mystery thriller book, and it shows in some ways. And what's weird about this book in particular is that it almost feels like the same story as one of her later novels that we'll talk about in a minute, but with different characters and a different setting, but basically the same setup. So that setup is we have a group of friends that have known each other for a very long time, and they are getting together for their New Year's Eve annual party that they do. And this year they have rented a cabin in this mountain that is like very snowy. They're going to be doing skiing and hunting, and it's very isolated. And on top of that, there's this big storm that is coming in, so they are not going to be able to have any contact with the outside world for the most part for the foreseeable future, which is, you know, sketchy a little bit at first, but add on to that the fact that these friends have a lot of secrets from each other, and some of them aren't quite as friendly as they might have at first appeared. And on top of that, you've got some guests staying on this property that they have never met before. There are some guests that are staying here that rented another cabin on that property, and they had originally been assured that nobody else was going to be there. So there are these strangers here that are giving them some weird vibes. And on top of that, the property managers who are also there may have some secrets as well. The setup of the story, aside from that though, is that a body has been discovered, and we're going back and forth in time to before the events of the supposed murder and after the body has been found, kind of alternating, going back and forth. But the angle that she chooses to take with this story, and with another one that we'll get to later, is that you don't know who's dead for a very long time in the book. So you spend most of your time not only trying to figure out who the murderer is, but also who the murdered person is, because she is very vague about the descriptions of the person and who is reacting to the news that that person is dead. It's all like, oh, the group was immediately struck by this loss, da-da-da-da-da. So you have no idea who's actually there, other than the people who are announcing that they found the body, who are the property managers in this case. So that's the general setup for this book. And that is really what frustrates me about this. First of all, it is almost like a copy and paste of another one of her books that we'll talk about in a little bit, which not only negatively impacted this experience because I read this one after having read the other one, but on top of that, it also cheapens my enjoyment of the other one. So it's kind of messed up on both of those counts. But ultimately, I feel like I was doomed, and most readers who read this author's works were doomed to not like whatever book they read second. So if you read this book first, you'd like this one more, and if you read the other book first, you'd like that one more. And unfortunately, this is just the one that I read later, so I didn't end up enjoying it as much. That being said, additionally, I felt like there were no likable characters for the most part. Maybe one, but all of them just had a lot of secrets and a lot of miscommunication, and they just weren't willing to be honest with each other most of the time. And I was frustrated by that. It's a common thriller trope though, so it is what it is. But additionally, there just really weren't very many satisfying twists in this. I mean, if you're a mystery thriller reader, oftentimes one of the best aspects of a story is the twists. So whether or not you're able to predict them, the journey of you kind of trying to guess what those twists are. It's not everything in a mystery thriller story, but it is a big factor for a lot of people. And for me, none of the twists and reveals really worked. There was one where I was like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But everything else along the way, I just didn't care that much about these characters. I didn't really care about the setup and the setting and everything. And I just spent the whole book almost feeling frustrated by the fact that I didn't know who got murdered, rather than on the edge of my seat, which was my initial experience with this kind of concept that Lucy Foley seems to do quite frequently. There are some things that I enjoyed about this book. So I did like the setting quite a bit. I found like the snowy mountainside kind of interesting, the cabins, the New Year's celebration, and all that. I did enjoy those things, but ultimately I found this book to just be kind of cliche, and it didn't do anything special for me. So it is my least favorite Lucy Foley book, and ultimately I would give it like a 2.5 to maybe a 3-star. It's okay, it's well written, but it just doesn't do a whole lot for me, unfortunately. So coming in third place, we have The Paris Apartment. Now this was the follow-up to her smash hit, The Guest List. So there was a lot of pressure on Lucy Foley to produce something that was really spectacular, and I do think that she swung for the fences in a way, and it kind of paid off. We're gonna get to that in a minute, but I will say that I feel like a lot of people are pretty hard on this book, just based on the reviews that I've read, and I get that it's very different from The Guest List, and in some ways it didn't work all the way, but I do commend her for the originality of this book, and I did enjoy quite a few aspects of it. So let's talk about this book. In The Paris Apartment, we follow a young woman who is kind of experiencing some trouble, and so she flees from law enforcement in her country and comes to stay with her brother, who has an apartment in Paris. She's been kind of estranged from this brother. They were close, but then I believe their parents died and they got split up. Basically, one family adopted him and not her, and she ended up just being like in foster care. So she has a lot of bitterness there, but she's trying to rekindle this relationship, at least because she needs help. Whether or not she really feels a lot for her brother is a whole different thing, but she is trying to invest in this relationship for that reason. That being said, on the day she is set to show up at his apartment, she's texting him. He says, yeah, go ahead and come on over. And she gets there and he's gone. He is nowhere to be found, and there's some weird stuff going on in his apartment that makes her think that something bad might have happened to him. On top of that, we have this apartment where there's definitely a very eerie vibe to the whole place, and every single tenant seems to know something about what's going on, not only with her brother, but with the apartment itself and those who run it, but they are either not willing or are too afraid to tell her anything that they know. So that's the setup of this book, and I did feel immediately drawn in by that. However, I had two main qualms that I want to go ahead and get out of the way. First of all, I found the plot to be a bit convoluted. It also never really got going for me, at least not until like the final third of this book. I liked the introduction where she's immediately just like thrust into this environment where she doesn't know anything. She literally doesn't even speak the language. So she's at this great disadvantage, and she is left to kind of wander her way through this situation as best she can, relying on those who are willing to help her, but also relying on herself and her own grit to get through the situation and find her brother wherever he might be. So I did like that, but unfortunately, aside from the general setup, she just kind of wanders around for a while trying to get information, not getting a whole lot, having questions herself, but nothing really happens for the first like half of the book at the very least, other than her having conversations with people and then behaving kind of sketchily and not giving her a whole lot of information. So that was frustrating. And then additionally, Lucy Foley did this thing numerous times throughout this book, and she's done it in other books by her as well. But in this one in particular, she did it quite a bit at the very beginning, and it bothered me, where like she would have a character, for example, the main character is in the apartment and she's like, I feel a sharp pain that is blinding and I fall to the ground. And then it cuts to like a different character perspective or to the past or what have you. And you're like, oh my gosh, what was that? And then it comes back and it was like a cat scratched her. So it's like this fake tension almost. And it just felt very cheap. And she did that a handful of times in this book. And like I said, she's done it in other books as well. But in this one, it was like kind of back to back to back. And there were just a lot of like cheap shots. That's what it felt like. And so that was frustrating. Now, those complaints aside, I did really like a lot about this book. Like I said, I enjoyed the setup of it, where she's in this place she doesn't know and she's trying to find her brother. I liked that. I liked the apartment setting. It was very mysterious. Like I said, very eerie, and there was a lot going on that I wasn't sure about as well. And I knew that everyone had mixed motivations, and there was just something messed up going on there. You could immediately tell. So I like that. I also like the setting of Paris. I thought that was kind of nice as well, and refreshing from her other books that I had read, because this was the third book that I read by her when I did finish it. And other than that, I also really liked the payoff for this one. Like I said, the hunting party was really frustrating because along the way it didn't really do anything that surprised me. In this book, I feel like Lucy Foley took quite a few chances, and I can see those not really working out for people, but ultimately I was convinced, and I did really like the way that those things paid off. I liked the grand reveals, I liked the ending, and there were definitely some moments in here where I thought I knew what was going on and I didn't. So the Paris apartment really worked pretty well for me. I won't say that I loved it, but I did have a good time with it, and ultimately I'm going to give the Paris apartment a 3.5 star. It is my third favorite Lucy Foley book. Okay, big reveal here, because once I tell you what my number 2 is, it will reveal what my number 1 is. My second favorite Lucy Foley thriller book is The Guest List. So this, like I said, is the one that launched this author into huge popularity. And when I read it, I totally understood why. I actually did do a reading vlog very, very early in my BookTube channel journey, where I read 3 mystery thriller authors that I'd never read before, and this was one of the books I read because I'd never read a Lucy Foley book. So I'll include that down below if you would like my non-spoiler as I'm going reactions to the book. I'm going to tell you how I felt about the book from that video in just a moment, but first let me tell you what this book is about. In this book, we are at a wedding on an island, and it is very, very isolated. We have a big event going on, lots of friends coming together after having not seen each other for some time, and all of them have secrets. And on top of that, at the end of the wedding, it is revealed that there is a dead body. Now, we find out about that at the very beginning of the book, and we spend the rest of the book not only trying to figure out who the murderer is, but who has actually been murdered. They are all isolated on this island without any help from law enforcement, and are now left with a murderer amongst them trying to figure out what is going on. Does this sound familiar? It should, because that is basically the setup of The Hunting Party, which was her novel before The Guest List. And that is so frustrating to me. So frustrating. So initially, when I did read this book, you can see it in the reading vlog, I felt very strongly positive about this book. I actually gave it a 4.5 at the time, which is a very strong rating for me, especially for a mystery thriller. I didn't enjoy a lot of the characters, but I found the setting to be really exciting. I found the reveals to be absolutely shocking. There were quite a few twists that got me good. Not just like the big reveal of who was the murderer, but along the way, there were a lot of moments with these specific characters that I found really interesting and just took my breath away and totally blew my mind, which was fantastic. But I also just really liked this setup. And this is the frustrating thing. I really liked the fact that there was the murderer and the murdered, but we didn't know who either one of them were. And we spent the whole book kind of inching our way towards finding out who was killed. I absolutely loved that in my first reading experience. And unfortunately, now having read The Hunting Party, which is like copy and paste the same thing as The Guest List, I'm frustrated because The Guest List was written after The Hunting Party, but it's almost like Lucy Foley wrote The Hunting Party and was like, I think I could do it a little bit better. And so she wrote the same story again in a lot of ways in the guest list. So I still really enjoyed the execution of this story, but unfortunately the fact that this is basically the same thriller as the one before, but with different characters, slightly different backstories, and a different type of reveal to the same situation, I'm really frustrated. So I did still enjoy this book, and I do still have good feelings about it, but the fact that I read this a few years ago, paired with the fact that I've now read The Hunting Party and didn't like it as much, but felt like it had a lot of the same story beats as the guest list, I'm left feeling less enthusiastic about this book. That being said, I do want to say I do think this is a good thriller on its own. So if you're going to read either of them, I do recommend reading The Guest List over The Hunting Party, and I almost would say I don't recommend reading The Hunting Party if you're going to read The Guest List, because I feel like the two will inevitably remind you of each other, to the point that if I had read this book and it was by a different author, I'd be like, man, they really took a lot of stuff from this other Lucy Foley book. And that's, it's so frustrating. So I liked this book a lot. On its own, I think it's really good. But in the overall scope and ranking of Lucy Foley's books, I can't help but feel frustrated. This book still does get second place, but I'm lowering it to a 3.5 to maybe a very light 4-star rating in hindsight. And it's not my favorite Lucy Foley book. Now, I am very excited to talk to you about my favorite Lucy Foley book, which is, of course, The Midnight Feast, the brand new release out this week, June 18th, 2024, by Lucy Foley. I think this book is really quite something. In this book, we are welcomed into the manor for its opening weekend. This is a very exclusive, very high-end resort hotel experience that is on the coast of this small town, kind of, I think it's in the UK somewhere, I can't remember where specifically, but it is set on the coast in the small town right by the ocean, and it is supposed to be this huge event. We get a lot of different perspectives in this book, though. We follow the owners of the hotel, Francesca, and her husband Owen. We also follow one of the employees there, Eddie. We also follow one of the guests named Bella, and there are a handful of other perspectives that we get here and there, as well as journal entries from the past from one of the characters. This book was really cool. I loved not only the setting of this hotel grand opening, but the small town issues that arose within this book. Because in this situation, we have these outsiders supposedly that are coming in and changing everything in this small town, this wild area that was for the locals, that they enjoyed, that they've really built their entire community around, has now been infiltrated by these outsiders. So there's this very big conflict between the hotel people and the locals, and there's so much tension there that is built throughout the story that I really, really enjoyed. On top of that, we do have the past to present type timeline, where present is after the events of the weekend. There has been a huge disaster. There are a handful of bodies or injured people around. There is a fire that has been raging, and there was very clearly some terrible stuff that went down at this event. And we get that in the present, and then it flashes back to the past of the weekend as it's starting and progressing, and then also there's journal entries from 15 years in the past. So all these things are going on, and there are these reveals of, okay, there's a dead body, we don't know who, but it's not overly reliant upon that one thing. There's that going on. There are other huge questions that are revealed throughout the story where it's not overly like, oh my gosh, who was the murderer, who was the murdered? A lot of stuff went down at this event, and you're left wondering who is involved in this, who is not involved in this, what is true, what is not true. It is just very, very well done. On top of that, there's also a cult slash supernatural angle that's introduced in this book that I thought was really well done. There are these things called the birds, and they're this local myth that they watch the forest and they're not to be messed with, and it's very eerie, very creepy, and it added this overall very dark atmosphere to the story and the sense of foreboding throughout the whole book that I really, really enjoyed. There were a lot of twists in this book that really knocked me off my feet that I didn't see coming. There were actually a few moments where I was almost getting frustrated. I was like, oh my gosh, I know where this is going. I know who this is. I know what's about to happen. And then those things didn't happen. So I was surprised. I was very pleased. And additionally, I just loved the way that this story unfolded. I will say I've read some reviews that say that the plot takes a moment to get off its feet. You don't really know what's going on at first. And I personally disagree. We're introduced to the characters pretty quickly. The chapters are pretty short. And additionally, you do quickly find out kind of the tone of each of the characters, I guess I would say. You immediately know that each one of them has a backstory that is very heavily impacting the decisions that they're making and their motivations for being at this grand opening in the first place. I really loved that, and I personally felt like the plot, while it did take a moment to really pick up the pace, when it did, it was like big question here, big question there, big question here, and then the last like 20% was just utter chaos, and I loved it. I really actually ended up enjoying this thriller a lot, and the more that I think about it, the more that I enjoyed it. I think that this is really fantastic. I think that Lucy Foley has topped the guest list here, and I also really appreciate a lot of the originality that she brought to this story. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it a lot. I think that this book, The Midnight Feast, is one of the best thrillers that I've read all year. It's easily Lucy Foley's best, and it makes me very excited to see what she writes next. Hopefully leaving behind the burdensome, repetitive nature of the hunting party and the guest list and moving on to bigger and better things. But that's it for this ranking and review video. Have you read any Lucy Foley books? And if so, which one is your favorite? Are you excited to read The Midnight Feast? Like I said, it is out this week, so definitely go ahead and check it out. It gets my stamp of approval. I'm giving it a good solid like 4 to 4.5 rating. It was really excellent, and like I said, one of my favorite thrillers of the year. I hope that you enjoyed this video though. Let me know in the comments what author I should do this for next, and I hope you stick around, subscribe, maybe like this video if you want to. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.